Hi, in this episode we'll implement the simplest token authentication functionality. So let's get started. First we need to actually make requests to a server from our login form, because now we just making a console log. We can remove these lines from here and also the console log itself, and we will use auth service, which we're going to create in a moment, for making the login request. And we just provide this scope user object to this login method. So let's inject this auth into our controller and let's create it. So we go to services and here we're going to create auth.js, and as usual, and there's going to be a service which we call auth function, and it will make HTTP requests. So we will inject HTTP service into this one. Okay, so let's define login method. There's going to be a function which takes user, and inside of it we return promise from HTTP post request, and the post request will be to API login. And we need to provide parameters. So for email we'll use user email, and for password we'll use user password. Okay, let's save it. Now let's open index.html file and include this service into here, auth. So now if we go to browser and make valid credentials and make login, you can see that we have API login post request right here. So of course there is no route matching post API.login. So how token authentication works? Basically, client sends credentials like we do from this login form, and if these credentials are valid, server generates unique token, saves it into the database, and return it to client. Then client saves it somewhere, like in cookies or local storage, and then include it in every request it makes to the server. So basically we need to implement following things. First, checking for credentials and generating token. Second, client needs to store token and include it into every request. And third, server needs to check token for every resource which requires authentication. So now we need users. In our case, we'll have only admin for now, but later, maybe we'll like to add regular users as well. But for now, we will have only two roles, guests and admins. So for authentication, we'll use the most popular gem out there, device. So let's go to our backend application in gem file and include gem device. And of course, we need to go and make bundle install command. Now when we have device installed, let's generate Rails generate device install. That will generate initializer and give us some instructions, but we will ignore them because we use Rails like API, and it generates initializer device.rb with lots of options, which I highly recommend you to read through. So now when we have it, so let's generate with Rails generate device, and we generate model user, and that will create migration and all these files and the model itself. So let's go to this migration. So we go to migration, device, create user. And here let's add string field authentication token, like this. So now we can run rake db migrate. Good. So now we also need to go to routes.rb file, and you can see the device created here routes for users. But we will create our own session controller in a bit, so we're gonna skip sessions routes. Okay. And as user, we want to add here the post route for API login. And this route will be pointing to session create action, like this. So now we need to create this sessions controller. So let's go to app controllers, and inside of it, create sessions controller.rb. So there's going to be a class, sessions controller, which inherits from device sessions controller. And in here, let's define index. Let's save it. Make sure that both of your servers are running, and I'm gonna run it not in test environment anymore, so in development environment. And let's go to browser and reload the page and try to make request. You can see here that we making request to login API with a post request, and we have in response we have invalid authenticity token. And that happens because we have CSRF protection, but we do not need it anymore because Rails app in our case is just an API. So let's go to application controller file, and here in protect from forgery we're gonna remove this exception with null session, like you can read here in comments. For APIs we just change it to null session. Let's save it, go back here again, click on login, and now you can see that the message has been changed. Now we have no method create. Okay, that's good. That's what we actually want to see. Not index, of course, create. So in this create action, we need to do three things. First, we need to check for credentials. And then if credentials are valid, we want to create authentication token and send it to the client. So let's do this. First of all, we'll have this user find by database authentication. That's the method which device provides us and which allows us to find user by email. So we specify email from params email. So then if user is found and user has a valid password, also method provided by device, and we provide the password itself. So if password is valid, then we create an authentication token and sending it to the user. Else we render nothing and also return status unauthorized. Let's save it. Let's go back to browser and let's try it out. And now you can see here that we have find by database authentication. Okay, find for, not by. Let's try it again. Click login. And now you can see that nothing returned, but the status code is unauthorized. That's exactly what we want. Great. So now let's create authentication token. For that, here, if everything is okay, we're going to create this token with the help of user ensure authentication token. And this method will generate token and save it into the user and into the database. And now we have this token, we want to render JSON with this auth token. Okay, so now we need to go to user model and define this ensure authentication token method. So let's go to user.rb and right here, let's define ensure authentication token method. So first, it's gonna set authentication token to the generated authentication token. So we will use another method, generate authentication token. Then we will save it and then we will return it like this. So now we need to create this method generate authentication token. And that's just a code that is provided in a gist from device gem. We make in a loop, infinitive loop. Then in this loop, we create token with the help of device method friendly token. And then we break from this infinite loop with this token unless it's not unique. So unless user where authentication token, this token first, like this. Okay, and that's all that we need to do. So this method here will generate authentication token and set it to the model, save this model and return this authentication token. And this method generates authentication token by just creating unique token. Okay, so now we need user in the database so we can actually log in. So for that, let's go to seeds, and here at the bottom, let's create user with email. Let's say admin email.com and password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's save it. Now let's go to terminal and run rake dbseed. So now if we go to Rails console, for example, and take the first user, you can see that here is admin user with encrypted password right here. Excellent. So now let's try it in the browser. So we already know that when we provide invalid credentials, it returns unauthorized, but let's provide valid. So we provide admin email.com 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and when we click login, it has eternal server error. Okay, I've got a mistype with render in sessions controller here, not renden but render. Let's try it again. And now you can see here that everything went fine and we have auth token returned to us. Great, that's exactly what we need. Okay, so now let's make our front-end application to react appropriately. So first, the easiest part, the error message. When something goes wrong on our login form, we want to display that, you provided wrong credentials. So for that, let's go back to our login controller. So in here, auth login will return promise. So let's define this promise here. And then we register on then two callbacks, success and error. That's going to be just a simple function. So let's define them. Success going to be for now just an empty function, and error will have the response here. And inside of it, we will just create on a scope, we create wrong credentials variable and we set it to true. Okay, so now in a login HTML file, right here at the top, let's add div with class alert danger and with ng show wrong credentials. And we just make it like wrong credentials. So now let's go to browser and let's try to sign up with the wrong credentials. And you can see we have the wrong credentials. Excellent, it works. So now for this success. On a success, we want to store this auth token somewhere. So let's make request with valid credentials. And now here in response, you can see the auth token and we want to save this auth token. So for the sake of this example, we'll use local storage for this. Of course, in the real world application, you should think about the most universal approach, maybe with falling back to cookies, but now we will use just the local storage. So let's go back to our login controller, and right here we have also a response object. And in our success, we want to set local storage, set item, which called auth token, to response data auth token. Okay, so that will set it. And after that, we want to use a location and change path to, let's say, edges. So we make a redirect. So we need, of course, to inject this location to our controller. So we have location and save it. So let's try it now. So I'm making request with valid credentials and I am redirected. And if you go to resources and see local storage, you will see that auth token has been saved in local storage. Excellent. So the next step is to include this auth token, if it's present, to all requests. For that, we need to create interceptor and register it. So every AJAX request is decorated with auth token. So we're going to create it right in the app.js. So let's open app.js file. And here, before this config, let's create new service, because interceptor is just a service, it's just a factory. And we call it auth interceptor. Okay, so this interceptor returns object which has special methods. One of these methods is request. So this, with the help of this method, we can intercept requests and somehow change them. So this request will have a config object that we're gonna use. So first of all, in this config object, we check in for headers, and we set it to config headers or empty object. And then if local storage has auth token in it, then we set config headers and we call it token to local storage auth token. And then we return this config object. Okay, so now we have this interceptor object. We need to add it to the interceptors collections, and we do it with the help of the config function, and we inject HTTP provider service. And in here, we'll use it HTTP provider interceptors. That's an array, and we push into this array our auth interceptor. Let's save it. Okay, so now if we go to browser and let's have a look at the network and into the edges and headers, you'll see that we have token here because we already logged in. We have this token in our resources in a local storage, and that's why every time we make a request anywhere, this token here is included into the headers. So if, for example, in resources we delete auth token and reload the page, now in network, of course, we won't have this token header here. Okay, so now we have the first part of the equation. User can authenticate itself, it gets the auth token, and this auth token is sent with every request. The second part is checking whether user authenticated or not on server when request with this auth token comes in. So let's imagine that we have an admin dashboard page, and when user gets there, Angular application makes request to server to fetch some data, for example, about all users of the system. So if it's not authenticated, then it just redirects back to login page. So let's implement this behavior. First, we need to define route. So right here, let's define new route. We call it admin. And with template URL is going to be views, pretty standard admin.html, and with controller, admin controller. Okay, so now let's create admin controller, admin.js. So we define controller, admin controller, like a function, and we will use HTTP here just to make the request. So let's make it HTTP, just for testing, get API and, for example, users resource, like this. So now let's create view admin.html, and that's also going to be very easy, just h1 admin. Okay, so now if we go to browser and we are not logged in because we have nothing in local storage now, and if we go to admin, we of course will see this admin page. So now we want to protect it from the server side. So for that, in our Rails application in routes, let's create new resource, and we will call it users, only for index. And let's create new controller. In app controllers API, we're going to create controller users controller.rb. So inside of this controller, we will have index section. Okay, so now we need to protect this index section or any actions on this controller. And for this, we'll use filter. So before filter, and we call it authenticate user from token. So this method, this filter, will authenticate user from the token. So if it's authenticated, then the current user will be available. If it's not, then current user will return nil. Okay, so for that, let's go to application controller where we can define this method. So let's define authenticate user from token. So first, we need to make sure that token is present. So for that, we check request headers, and we check it for token header and its presence. If it's present, it's true. Then user equals token and user find by authentication token. So if token is there in headers, then we try to find a user by this authentication token. So let's provide this token and we make it to string. And if user in the end is there, then we sign it in. Sign in is provided by device and we just provide user. And also we said that we do not want to store this user. Okay, and that's all. That's all that we need to do. That's the simplest possible authentication from a token. It's not very safe, but it will do for now. So now when we have it, let's go back to our users controller. And right here in index, we make a very simple check. So if current user, and it will return true, or more precisely, it will return user if authenticate user from token was successful. So in this case, we render nothing. So everything is okay. But if not, then we render JSON with empty object and status unauthorized. Okay, and that should do it. It's not very clean and we should create failure app class, but that's not course about Rails, so we settle on this simple solution. So now if we reload the page, we do not do any request to the server because we haven't included admin controller into the index HTML. So let's go and do this. In index HTML, let's include new controller here, admin. Now let's reload the page. And now we are doing this request and we getting back unauthorized. Excellent. That's what we actually want. Again, if we log in with valid credentials and then go to admin, nothing bad is happening. So users return status okay. So it works. I'm gonna remove our token again and reload the page. So now we need to add response error method to auth interceptor. So the basic idea is to redirect to login every time when we get unauthorized response. So let's go back to our app.js, and here in interceptor we're going to add another method, response error, and that's a function with response object. And first of all, we should return promise with reject and response as a parameter. And of course, we need to inject this queue service. Now, we can do anything we like with this response. So intercept it as we like. So for example, if response status equals to 401, then we want to use location path to redirect it to login. Okay, so again, we need to add this location here. So if we go to admin right here, we are redirected back to login because we have no rights to see this page. Excellent. So the last thing left is logout. So first of all, we need to show this logout link. We will show it right here, and we will show it only when the user, of course, logged in. So for that, let's go to navbar HTML, where our navbar stores, and let's add here another list item with ng show. So we will show it only when user is logged in. And inside of it, we will have anchor tag with ng click to log out. And we call it logout. Okay, like this. So now if we go to browser, nothing changes because we do not even have this is logged in method. So for that, let's go to navigation.js file. So the controller for our navbar. So inside of it, let's define on scope, we're going to define is logged in. And that's going to be function on auth is logged in, like this. So we need to inject it in here. And of course, we will implement it right now. So let's go to auth and let's create is logged in. So we do this is logged in. It's a function. And it will return if local storage get item auth token, then it will return true. If not, it will return false. So very easy. Let's save it. And now if we go back to browser and sign in, you will see logout link right here. Excellent. So now clicking on it, we want to log out. So we will define this logout functionality right here in auth. So we do this logout. That's a function. And it will return promise as usual from HTTP delete API logout. Okay, like this. So now back to our navigation controller. We define scope logout is the function in which we again take the promise from auth logout, and then we make this promise then and attach callback, success callback for it. And instead of it, we want to delete local storage. So remove item from local storage auth token. And then again, we want to redirect it to login. Okay, like this. So now we need to go to our Rails application. And for that, we go to routes.rb. And here, let's define for the session destroy action, we will define logout for the delete. Let's save it and let's go to sessions controller and define here the destroy action. So basically what we want to do here is we want for the current user, we want authentication token to set it to nil and then save this current user. And then just render successful response, JSON empty object. And also we want to authenticate before the destroying. So before filter is going to be authenticate user from token, except create action. Okay, so let's have a look. Now, if I click on logout, I'm logged out. No local storage anymore, and I do not see here anything, and I can go to admin. So we basically have all needed functionality for login and logout. Okay, in this episode we implemented token authentication. So thank you very much for your time, and see you in the next episode where we're going to create new age.